Hello, I want to welcome you to this session of Something More. Just want to give you one disclaimer here that um, we're getting ready to do some painting, flooring, and so we won't be back for a few weeks. But as some famous people have said, I will be back. And you can put the accent on that if you want. Um, but today we want to talk about the issue of living by the truth. And to live by the truth, first you have to take hold of it and not let go of it. Um, we hear many voices, some inside our own head, many external, many entities. But there's only two sources of those voices. One is truth and the other is error or falsehood or deception. There are individuals who have a vested interest in misleading us, setting up a false reality. For when you don't hold to the truth, you begin to live by things that are untrue. You begin to live with a false reality in your lives. And there are individuals who have a vested interest in doing that so they can control us in one way or another. Whatever benefit they get from it, whether it's just more power or whether it's financial benefit, there are those entities that want to do that to us. Today we're dealing with some words that are very important, and John feels compelled to give us a warning in the beginning. And look at what he says before he gets into the rest of his discussion here. He says, "Dear children, do not let anyone lead you astray." Isn't it interesting that he felt that he had to stop and make that point before he delves into some other things? Because that tells you that somewhere, something, someone will likely try to lead us away from this truth. Deception is always designed to lead us away from the truth. I'm reminded when Satan came to reason with Eve in the garden, and God had told him about not eating the fruit in the middle of the garden, and Satan basically said, "Oh, it's not what it sounded like. It's really different than the way those words sounded to you, and it doesn't mean what you think." He loves to talk about God's word because he likes to twist it. He likes to soften it. Anytime you get explanations that want to make something easier, most of the time, that is a red flag, and you want to be careful. There was one devotional writer who was talking about certain words that Jesus had spoken that were very, very strong. And he said, if you took these words at face value, it would cause you to fall on your knees in utter despair. And then he went on and said, and that's exactly what Jesus intended it for it to do. So we don't like it when we're challenged, when truth is hard. Sometimes we would really like it to be easier. That's human nature. But what we have to do is take hold of it and say, I will not compromise with what is clearly being communicated. So let's look at what John is saying to us here. That is that kind of truth that he felt he first had to say, do not let anyone lead you astray. Here's his words. Do not let anyone lead you astray. He who does what is right is righteous, just as he is righteous. He meaning Jesus or God. He who does what is sinful is of the devil, because the devil has been sinning from the beginning. The reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the devil's work. No one who is born of God will continue to sin because God's seed remains in him. He cannot go on sinning because he has been born of God. This is how we know who the children of God are and who the children of the devil are. Anyone who does not do what is right is not a child of God. Strong words, folks, but truth that we need to take hold of. Excuse me. John draws two very clear, distinct lines here. He says, first of all righteousness is from God. God is righteous. In him's no darkness. There's no sin. On the other hand, all sin is of and from the devil because he's been sinning from the beginning, and that is his work. And he goes on to say, anyone who does not do what is right is not a child of God. If I used to shoplift and I go to the store 10 times or 9 times and I don't shoplift, but if the 10th time I do decide to pick something up, well, I did what's right 9 times, but the 10th time, it makes me guilty. And that's not anything that is of God. But the good news is that Jesus came to destroy the devil's work. And the devil's work is sin. And the devil's work in you is to get you to sin. See, when you sin, you do it. Yeah, you do it willfully. You're accountable. But he's also working you in ways that we're not always aware of. And he's having his way as he strings you along and makes you think it's all what you want. But he's having his way, and he has some power there and some influence in ways, like I said, that we're not always consciously aware of. But Jesus came to put a stop to what he's doing in your life. And the wording there says, the reason the Son of God appears. The old wording was to be made manifest, to be revealed. It's as if I'm sitting in my room and no one else is here, and suddenly he were to materialize. He appears. And, in a sense, he comes to our lives and he appears. And when he does, it is to destroy the devil's work. He shows up in a real way that he might stop what the enemy's doing. And he does that by bringing his life into your soul. The scripture here that we read talks about the fact that God's seed remains in him. The seed is a seed of life. It is God's life. It is God's presence, his spirit that remains, which means that it's always there. When God comes to us, when he appears to us and his spirit comes into our heart, we are saturated in every area with him. And then it says he remains. God's seed remains in a person, and that means he's always there. And we're very conscious of the fact that Jesus is always there, and the effect of it is that we no longer live the way we used to live. Now a person does not continue to sin. Here's some words on that, a separate passage. It says, no one who lives in him keeps on sinning. No one who continues to sin has either seen him or known him. So he spells it out pretty clearly. But when we are in him, that changes everything. Jesus, his seed remains. His spirit is always there with us, and it changes us. Now, when we deal with a truth like this, we react in a couple different ways. A person might say, okay, I'm going to take that at face value and give it the good old heave-ho, my best effort, all that a human person can do. But of course, we kind of know that we're going to come up short. There's going to be some somewhat regular ongoing issues of sin. And somehow we figure, well, if we do our best, then God will take care and somehow overlook it, and it's okay. The second way we try to deal with it is we try to find some other explanation. Sometimes in our own mind, we're trying to do that and saying, this cannot be true because we cannot do this. And so we naturally want to come up with another rationale. Sometimes we like to find some experts to give us a rationale. Some preachers, some Bible teachers, some theologian, and when they explain and give us another explanation, then we just run with it because we really want something that makes it a lot easier. But when we do that, we're challenging the very point of what God is saying. We're challenging the intent of his words, just as Satan did with Eve in the garden. He challenged God's words, and Eve, of course, fell for it. But when we allow anyone, even our own thinking or some Bible expert, to lead us away from the truth, to lead us astray, we are really falling into the workings and the plans of the enemy of our soul, Satan himself. And you know what? He wins then. And this is the very thing that John felt so compelled to warn us about in the beginning when he said, "Dear children, do not let anyone lead you astray." But in both of these approaches I just talked about, we're leaning on ourselves, whether we're giving our best effort, whether we're trying to come up with some explanation that makes it more palatable. We might say makes it realistic, Either one, we're leaning on ourselves. And Proverbs 3:5 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. And if we're ever going to trust in the Lord with all our heart, we're going to have to not lean on our own understanding. That is a dangerous thing to do. You see, here's the deal. When we come to the end of ourselves, that's when God does what he can do. That's when he works. And it's only when we come to the end of ourselves basically in despair, saying, I can't do it, I can't see how it's possible. It's only when we come to the end of ourselves that we really see what God can do and what he will do. So when we humble ourselves under his mighty hand and under his agenda and what he says, when we humble ourselves, then he lifts us up and he will set our feet on a much higher plane. And it's just a wonderful thing when we get to that point, the end of ourselves, and God really begins to do what he says he will do. And people have testified to this. This is not unheard of, though we may know few people these days who have experienced what John is talking about. It has happened. It's real. And it's so important to grasp the truth, to understand it, make sure we're not misunderstanding, but to take it in its context and to take hold of it and not let go of it, because then that's when we get to where God can work in our lives and we find that what he can do, that's something more. So we're going to wrap up here. I'm glad you could be with me. Hope you're going to have a really good day. It's early in the day here when I'm doing this, but maybe you're listening at the end of the day. Then I'll wish you a good evening. But we'll be off for a little while, and then we'll be back. Until then, have a great rest of your day, and blessings to you.